The stifling scent of lilies, a morbid perfume that always clung to funerals, choked me. It mingled with the damp earth and the even damper despair of the mourners gathered at my father's graveside. My father, Lord Valerius of Blackwood, a man whose name had once been synonymous with strength and honor, now lay buried beneath a mound of freshly turned soil. His enemies had finally claimed him, not with swords and shields, but with whispers and forged alliances. And the architect of his downfall, the man whose shadow now stretched long and cold over our ancestral lands, was Lord Darius Thorne. My name is Lyra of Blackwood. And I was his enemy's daughter. The wind whipped my dark hair across my face, stinging my eyes, but I refused to let the tears fall. Not here. Not in front of him. He stood a little apart from the throng, a silhouette against the overcast sky, his posture a study in controlled power. Even from this distance, I could feel the weight of his gaze, a predator surveying his newly acquired territory. I imagined him smirking, a thin, cruel curve of his lips, relishing the ruin he had wrought. Our families had been locked in a bitter feud for generations. Blackwood and Thorne. Two ancient houses, their animosity as deep-rooted as the oak trees that dotted our respective estates. My father had been a formidable opponent, a strategist who had always managed to outmaneuver Thorne's father, and then Thorne himself. But Darius Thorne was different. He was younger, bolder, and possessed a ruthlessness that had shocked even the hardened hearts of our court. He had played a long game, weaving a web of deceit and betrayal that had finally ensnared my father, leaving Blackwood vulnerable and exposed. And then, he had made his move. It wasn't a conquest of armies, but a conquest of contracts and claims. He had presented evidence, meticulously fabricated, of my father's treasonous dealings with a rival kingdom. Evidence so damning, so convincing, that even the king, swayed by Thorne's eloquent pronouncements and the strategic advantage of eliminating a potential threat, had been forced to act. My father was stripped of his titles, his lands confiscated, and the Thorne family, under Darius's command, had absorbed it all. But this wasn't enough for Darius Thorne. He wanted more than just land and power. He wanted to erase the Blackwood name from existence, to obliterate its legacy. And he had found a way, a particularly insidious and humiliating way, to achieve it. He had demanded my hand in marriage. The proposal had arrived not as a plea, but as a decree. Delivered by his most trusted lieutenant, a man with eyes as cold and sharp as ice shards. The king, eager to appease Thorne and solidify his newfound power, had readily granted the request. My father, broken and disgraced, had no choice but to agree. He had married me off to the man who had destroyed him, a sacrifice on the altar of his family's survival, or what little remained of it. And so, here I stood, a Blackwood bride, standing beside the man who had orchestrated my family's ruin. The lilies, once a symbol of my mother's favorite flower, now felt like a shroud. My younger brother, Thomas, a boy of 16 with my father's bright eyes but none of his fortitude, stood beside me, his hand a trembling weight on my arm. He had borne the brunt of Thorne's cruelty, his spirit chipped away by taunts and humiliations. He was all that was left of my immediate family, and the fear for his safety was a constant, gnawing ache in my chest. "Lyra," he whispered, his voice rough with unshed tears. "We have to go." I nodded, my gaze still fixed on Thorne. He turned then, his eyes the color of a storm-tossed sea, met mine. There was no warmth in them, no flicker of remorse or even pity. Only a steely determination, a chilling possessiveness that sent a shiver down my spine. He had won. He had taken everything. And now he owned me. The wedding had been a spectacle of forced civility. Thorn had ensured it was held at his ancestral seat, Thorn Manor, a fortress of dark stone that seemed to mock the crumbling elegance of Blackwood Castle. The ceremony was brief, the vows hollow. I had spoken my promises with a voice that felt like it belonged to someone else, a stranger trapped within my own body. Thorn's vows were clipped, precise, each word a declaration of ownership. "I take you, Lyra of Blackwood," he had said, his voice resonating through the hushed chapel, "to be my wife, to have and to hold, from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part." The words, so familiar from countless weddings, felt like a death knell. Now, as the last of the mourners dispersed, a contingent of Thorn's guards, clad in their distinctive black and silver livery, began to form a cordon around the graveyard, their presence a stark reminder of my new reality. I was no longer Lyra of Blackwood, the daughter of a proud lord. I was Lyra Thorn, the wife of the man who had brought my family to its knees. "Come!" A voice deep and resonant commanded from behind me. It was Thorn. He had approached without my noticing, his heavy boots crunching on the gravel path. His presence was an oppressive force, a physical weight that pressed down on me. I turned, my jaw set. "I will not be commanded, Lord Thorn." A flicker of something unreadable crossed his face, a brief tightening of his already stern expression, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "You are my wife now, Lyra. My commands are your duty." His words were a cold, hard truth. I clenched my fists, the rough fabric of my black morning gown a small comfort. Duty. Was that all I was now? A duty? A pawn in his game? Thomas squeezed my arm again, his silent plea for me to remain calm, to not provoke him. I looked at my brother, his face etched with the same fear that was a constant companion to me. I had to be strong for him, for the memory of my father. "Very well," I said, my voice carefully modulated, betraying none of the turmoil raging within me. "Lead the way, Lord Thorn." He inclined his head, a gesture of acknowledgement that held no warmth. He turned and began to walk towards the waiting carriage, a sleek, imposing vehicle drawn by 4 black stallions. I followed, Thomas close beside me, my heart a leaden weight in my chest. Each step was a surrender, a step further into the gilded cage Darius Thorn had built for me. The carriage interior was opulent, filled with dark, polished wood and rich velvet upholstery. It reeked of wealth and power, the very things that had been snatched from my family. Thorn settled onto one of the plush seats, his presence filling the confined space. He did not offer me a seat, nor did he speak. He simply watched me, his sea-storm eyes observing my every move. Thomas sat opposite us, his gaze fixed on the passing scenery, his small frame hunched as if trying to disappear. I wished I could do the same. The journey back to Thorn Manor was a silent, agonizing ordeal. The rhythmic clatter of the horses' hooves on the road was the only sound, a monotonous soundtrack to my despair. I stared out of the window, the familiar landscape of our shared borders blurring into a tapestry of greens and browns. It was a land that had once belonged to my family, a land that now belonged to him. As we approached Thorn Manor, its imposing silhouette rose against the horizon, a stark and formidable structure. It was a testament to Thorn's ambition and his success. Blackwood Castle, though grand, had always possessed a certain warmth, a sense of history etched in its stones. Thorn Manor, however, felt cold, austere, its very architecture designed to intimidate and impress. The gates swung open as we neared, revealing a sweeping drive lined with ancient, gnarled trees. Guards stood at attention, their faces impassive. The air crackled with an almost palpable sense of authority. This was Darius Thorn's domain, and I was now a part of it. As the carriage drew to a halt before the grand entrance, Thorn finally spoke, his voice cutting through the silence. "Welcome home, Lady Thorn." The words were laced with a subtle irony, a cruel twist of the knife. Home. This was not my home. It was my prison. And as I stepped out of the carriage, into the shadow of Thorn Manor, I knew my life had irrevocably changed. I was a captive, a trophy, a living testament to the Thorn family's victory. But within me, a tiny ember of defiance still glowed. I would not be broken. I would not be erased. I was Lyra of Blackwood, and I would find a way to survive. And perhaps, just perhaps, to fight back. The stifling scent of lilies, a perfume so heavy it felt like a physical presence, followed me, clinging to my mourning veil like a shroud woven from the very essence of grief. Each breath was a desperate, shallow struggle against the morbid fragrance, a constant suffocating reminder of my father's freshly turned grave and the architect of his utter ruin. Thorn. The very name was a bitter taste on my tongue, synonymous with betrayal, with the gnawing, icy ache in my chest that had become a permanent, unwelcome resident since the damning pronouncements of treason had fractured our lives into irreparable shards. The damp earth, still clinging to the soles of my worn boots, and the even damper, soul-crushing despair of the graveyard had been my entire world for what felt like an eternity, though in reality it had only been a handful of days. My father, the once proud and respected Lord Valerius of Blackwood, lay beneath the cold, unyielding soil, his name now tarnished, his illustrious legacy reduced to furtive whispers, and Thorn's meticulously fabricated evidence. Thorn, the formidable opponent, the cold-blooded strategist who had woven a web of deceit so expertly, so insidiously, that it had ensnared us all, leaving us gasping for air in its suffocating threads. And as the final, crushing blow, he had married me, his vanquished enemy's daughter, a trophy of his conquest, a final, humiliating decree designed to solidify his victory and rub salt into our gaping wounds. My younger brother, Thomas, a pale, spectral shadow of his former vibrant self, had been my only solace in the desolate, echoing aftermath of our ruin. His fear, a palpable entity that clung to him like a second skin, yet so incredibly vulnerable, had been a constant spur, a relentless prod to my own fraying resolve. Thorn had not spared him either. The casual, almost dismissive cruelty with which he had treated Thomas, the thinly veiled threats that dripped with menace, had chipped away at my last fragile vestiges of hope, leaving me feeling utterly exposed and defenseless. I had to protect him. That single unwavering thought, a beacon in the encroaching darkness, had been the only thing that had kept me from succumbing entirely to the overwhelming, soul-crushing despair that threatened to consume me whole. Now, the imposing vehicle, an obsidian carriage that seemed to possess a voracious appetite for the meager sunlight, waited with an almost predatory stillness. It was a stark, oppressive force, a gleaming symbol of Thorn's immense wealth and unyielding power, a gilded cage designed to shuttle me from the shattered remnants of my life to his opulent yet chilling domain. The polished wood of its exterior gleamed with an unnatural luster, and the deep velvet upholstery within promised a luxurious, yet ultimately suffocating, embrace. It was a stark, jarring contrast to the crumbling, yet once magnificent elegance of Blackwood Castle, a fortress that had once echoed with the vibrant symphony of laughter, music, and life, now hollowed out by ruin and despair. As I reluctantly stepped towards the waiting carriage, Thorn's lieutenant, a man whose face was as impassive and unyielding as carved stone, held the heavy door open. His eyes, devoid of any discernible warmth or flicker of humanity, swept over me, assessing, cataloging, as if I were a piece of inventory rather than a living, breathing woman. There was no courtesy in his gesture, only the cold, efficient execution of a duty assigned. I felt like a prize mare being paraded before a potential buyer. My worth measured not by the fire in my spirit or the strength of my character, but solely by my lineage and the strategic advantage my forced marriage represented. The journey was a monotonous, soul-numbing soundtrack of the carriage wheels grinding on the uneven, rutted road. Each rotation a relentless pull, dragging me further from the familiar comfort of my past and deeper into the suffocating embrace of Thorn's domain. I clutched the impossibly delicate lace of my gloves, my knuckles turning a stark, alarming white. My father's words, spoken in the hushed, desperate tones of their final, clandestine meeting, echoed and replayed in my mind like a broken record. "Lyra, my darling girl, you must be strong. For Thomas, for the Blackwood name, survive, find a way." Survive! The word felt like a brittle, sharp shard of glass lodged in my throat, impossible to swallow, impossible to expel. How could I possibly survive, let alone thrive, in the suffocating shadow of the man who had systematically and cruelly destroyed my family, who had extinguished the very light from our lives? How could I endure the forced civility, the suffocating artificial air of Thorn Manor, a fortress designed not for comfort, but to intimidate and impress, a monument to his dominance? I imagined its stark, brutalist architecture, its imposing silhouette against the bruised twilight sky, a physical manifestation of Thorn's absolute power and control. I pictured the gnarled, ancient trees surrounding it, their branches like skeletal, grasping fingers reaching out to ensnare any soul foolish enough to trespass on his ill-gotten territory. My gaze, drawn by an almost involuntary pull, drifted to the passing landscape. The familiar fields, once the verdant, fertile pride of Blackwood, now lay barren, neglected, and desolate. The very land seemed to mourn, a silent, heartbreaking mirror to the desolation that had taken root within me. Thorn had not merely taken our lands, he had stolen our very essence, our heritage, our future, leaving behind only a hollow, echoing silence where laughter and prosperity once resided. As the carriage finally drew to a jarring, decisive halt, the imposing, almost menacing silhouette of Thorn Manor loomed before me. It was a formidable, intimidating structure, built of dark, unyielding stone that seemed to absorb all light and warmth, its windows like vacant, soulless eyes staring out at the world with an unsettling blankness. A palpable, almost tangible sense of authority radiated from it, a chilling, possessive aura that spoke of Thorn's absolute, unquestioned control over everything within its formidable walls. This was not a home. It was a monument to his conquest, a living, breathing testament to my family's ignominious downfall. The heavy oak door creaked open with a low groan, as if in protest, revealing a cavernous, dimly lit hall. The air within was cool, almost unnaturally so, carrying the faint metallic scent of old money and something else. Something sharp, sterile, and disquieting, like the distinct chilling absence of life itself. A stern-faced housekeeper, her gray bun pulled impossibly tight, stood waiting with an almost unnerving stillness, her posture as rigid and unyielding as a soldier at attention. "Welcome to Thorn Manor, Lady Thorn," she announced, her voice devoid of any inflection, any warmth, any hint of genuine welcome. The title felt entirely foreign, a mocking, hollow echo of a life I never desired, a destiny I desperately wished to escape. I stepped inside, my every sense on high alert, a primal instinct for survival kicking in. The silence within the manor was profound, almost deafening, broken only by the soft, solitary echo of my own hesitant footsteps on the cold, polished marble floor. Portraits of Thorn's ancestors, stern men with hard, piercing eyes and inscrutable expressions, lined the walls, their gazes seeming to follow me, to judge me, to weigh my worth. They were the silent, unyielding guardians of his legacy, the embodiment of the immense power to which I was now irrevocably bound. A faint tremor ran through me, an instinctive, involuntary reaction to the oppressive, suffocating atmosphere that permeated every inch of the manor. This was my prison, a gilded cage meticulously constructed by the very architect of my family's utter ruin. Yet beneath the chilling veneer of fear, a tiny, defiant ember began to glow, a spark of resilience that refused to be extinguished. My father's words, "Find a way," resonated with renewed, unwavering force. I would not be broken. I would not be extinguished. I would endure. I would find a way to reclaim what had been stolen, to avenge my father's tarnished name, and to protect Thomas with every fiber of my being. The marriage was a decree, a humiliation, a strategic advantage for Thorn. But it was also, I realized with a dawning sense of fierce determination, an opportunity. An opportunity to observe, to learn, and to wait patiently for the opportune moment to strike. I was his enemy's daughter, now his wife, ensnared in his elaborate, sinister design. But I was not merely a pawn to be manipulated and then discarded. I was a Blackwood, and the Blackwoods, as history had shown, never truly died. They merely waited, with a patient, simmering fury for the right moment to rise, phoenix-like, from the ashes of their own destruction. The imposing silhouette of Thorn Manor loomed against the bruised twilight sky, a formidable fortress of dark stone and shadowed battlements. It was a stark contrast to the crumbling elegance of Blackwood Castle, my ancestral seat, a place that, despite its dilapidation, had always held a warmth that this new edifice utterly lacked. Here, the very air felt heavy, oppressive, as if the very walls exuded an aura of cold, calculated power. My carriage, an opulent vessel of polished dark wood and velvet upholstery, had deposited me at the foot of the grand stone steps. The monotonous soundtrack of the carriage wheels, a rhythmic thudding against the gravel, had been replaced by an even more monotonous silence, broken only by the rustle of my own silk gown and the distant, almost imperceptible sigh of the wind through the gnarled trees that guarded the estate. I stepped out, my hand instinctively reaching for the cool, smooth surface of the carriage door, a desperate anchor in a sea of overwhelming newness. Lord Darius Thorn stood at the top of the steps, his imposing figure a stark silhouette against the dimly lit entryway. He was a study in contrasts, impeccably dressed in dark, tailored attire that spoke of immense wealth and meticulous attention to detail, yet his posture exuded an almost predatory stillness. His face, even from this distance, was unreadable, a stern expression etched into features that seemed carved from granite. He was the architect of my family's downfall, the man who had orchestrated the ruin of my father. And now, through a cruel twist of fate and royal decree, he was my husband. The king's pronouncement had been a death knell for everything I held dear. Thorn, with his fabricated charges and damning evidence, had systematically dismantled my father's reputation, his lands, and his very life. And now he possessed me, his prize, his final conquest. I was Lady Thorn, a title that felt like a brand, a living testament to my family's subjugation. My younger brother, Thomas, was my sole focus, the gnawing ache in my chest a constant reminder of his vulnerability. He remained at Blackwood, under the care of a distant aunt, but I knew Thorn's reach was long. My marriage was not just a personal tragedy. It was a strategic move, a way to solidify his power, to erase the Blackwood name from the annals of influence. And Thomas, my innocent, fragile Thomas, was the ultimate pawn. Lady Thorne. Thorne's voice, modulated and deep, cut through the silence, devoid of any warmth or welcome. It was a statement, not an invitation. He did not move from his position, his gaze unwavering, assessing. He intended to intimidate, to impress upon me the stark reality of my new existence. I took a breath, forcing my shoulders back, injecting a sliver of the fortitude my father had always instilled in me. I would not be a trembling bride, a victim consumed by despair. "My lord," I replied, my voice steady, though a tremor threatened to betray the turmoil raging within. He inclined his head, a gesture that held no deference. "Welcome to Thorne Manor." The words were spoken with a chilling possessiveness, as if he were claiming ownership not just of the estate, but of me as well. The butler, a stoic man in stark livery, materialized from the shadows of the entrance hall, his face a mask of practiced neutrality. He bowed shallowly. "My lord, the family awaits." I flinched inwardly. Family. The word felt foreign, hollow. Thorne's family. A family forged in the fires of ambition and ruthlessness, I presumed. I had been told little about them, only that they were a formidable force, loyal to their patriarch. Thorne extended a hand, not to me, but to gesture me forward. It was a subtle but potent assertion of authority. I walked past him, my steps measured, my gaze sweeping over the grand hall. It was a testament to Thorne's wealth, certainly, but it lacked the soul of Blackwood. The tapestries were opulent but impersonal, the portrait stern and unsmiling. The very air seemed to carry the weight of unspoken history, a history of dominance and control. The drawing room was dimly lit, the only illumination emanating from a roaring fire that did little to dispel the chill that permeated the space. 2 figures sat by the hearth, their faces turned towards me as I entered, Thorne following close behind. A woman, her hair pulled back in a severe bun, her features sharp and aristocratic, regarded me with a cool, appraising stare. Her eyes, the color of a storm-tossed sea, held a glint of something I couldn't quite decipher. Curiosity, perhaps, or a subtle challenge. This, I assumed, was Thorne's mother, a formidable matriarch, no doubt. Beside her sat a younger man, his face paler, his expression more hesitant. He was Thorne's brother, I surmised, a stark contrast to his elder's imposing presence. He offered a small, almost imperceptible nod, his gaze flickering away quickly. "Lyra." Thorne's voice, now louder, addressed the woman. "My wife." The matriarch's gaze remained fixed on me. "Lady Thorne, a pleasure." The words were polite, but her tone was cool, distant. There was no warmth, no welcoming gesture. I curtsied, my movement stiff. "Madame Thorne, it is an honor to be welcomed into your home." A fabricated sentiment, but one that was expected. She merely inclined her head, her eyes never leaving mine. "Darius has spoken of you." I dared not ask what he had spoken. I could only imagine the carefully crafted narratives he had woven, painting himself as the wronged party, the savior of a fallen house, and me as a pawn he had graciously acquired. Thorne's brother finally spoke, his voice softer than his brother's. "Welcome, Lady Lyra." There was a flicker of something in his eyes, a hint of sympathy perhaps, that his elder brother's stern gaze did not allow. "Thank you, sir," I replied, forcing a polite smile that felt brittle on my lips. The conversation that followed was stilted, a forced civility that hung heavy in the air. Thorne dominated the exchange, his pronouncements eloquent and authoritative, but devoid of any genuine connection. He spoke of the estate, of his plans, of the duties that lay ahead for me as Lady Thorne. Each word was a carefully placed stone in the foundation of my gilded cage. I listened, absorbing the details, my mind a whirlwind of calculations. I needed to understand this new world I had been thrust into, to find its weaknesses, its chinks in its formidable armor. I needed to protect Thomas, and that meant I had to survive. After what felt like an eternity, Thorn rose. "It is late. Lyra will require rest." He did not ask if I was tired. He decreed it. I rose with him, my legs feeling heavy, my resolve a fragile ember. As I turned to follow him from the room, my gaze fell upon a small, framed portrait on a side table. It was of Thorn and his mother, their faces stern, unsmiling. Beneath it, in elegant script, was a date. A date that marked a significant event, perhaps a celebration, a triumph. I could not decipher the exact occasion, but the aura of cold, unyielding power emanating from the image was unmistakable. As Thorn led me from the drawing room, his hand lightly touching the small of my back, a gesture that was both possessive and impersonal, I felt a surge of something akin to anger. This was not my home. This was a prison, albeit an opulent one, and Darius Thorn was my captor. He led me through a labyrinth of corridors, each more grand and imposing than the last. The silence of the house pressed in on me, broken only by the soft echo of our footsteps. Finally, we reached a set of heavy oak doors. Thorn pushed them open, revealing a chamber that was both luxurious and intimidating. The room was vast, dominated by a large, four-poster bed draped in dark, rich fabrics. A fireplace stood cold and empty, a stark reminder of the lack of warmth in this place. A large window overlooked the darkened grounds, the moonlight casting long, spectral shadows. It was a room designed for comfort, yet it felt like a cell. "This will be your chamber," Thorn stated, his voice low. He did not offer any further explanation, any gesture of comfort. I stood in the center of the room, my gaze sweeping over the opulent furnishings, the heavy draperies, the imposing furniture. It was a room meant to impress, to awe, but all I felt was a profound sense of isolation. "You will want for nothing, Lyra," Thorn continued, his voice a silken threat. "You are Lady Thorn now. Your needs will be met. Your duties will be clear." My duties? To be his wife? To bear his name? To be a silent, decorative ornament in his grand design? The thought sent a shiver down my spine. He stepped closer, his imposing silhouette casting a shadow over me. I could feel the palpable sense of his authority, the sheer force of his personality. He was a predator, and I was ensnared. "Do not mistake this for weakness, Lyra," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying an unmistakable weight. "You are my wife. You belong to me." I met his gaze, my own eyes flashing with a defiance I had carefully concealed. "I belong to myself, my lord," I stated, my voice barely audible, yet laced with a determination that surprised even me. A flicker of something, surprise perhaps, or a grudging respect, crossed his face, a fleeting expression that vanished as quickly as it appeared. He did not respond, merely held my gaze for a long moment. A silent battle of wills played out in the oppressive silence of the chamber. Then, with a curt nod, he turned and left, the heavy doors closing behind him with a soft thud that seemed to seal my fate. I was alone, a captive in Thorn Manor, the wife of my family's destroyer. But as I stood there, the weight of his words and his gaze pressing down on me, a tiny ember of defiance, long suppressed, began to glow within my chest. He had married me to destroy my family, to claim Blackwood as his own. But he had underestimated the resilience of a Blackwood daughter. He had fallen in love with the idea of conquest, but he had yet to understand the woman he had ensnared. And I, Lyra of Blackwood, would find a way to fight back. This marriage, this prison, would not be the end of me. It would be the beginning of my resistance. The suffocating scent of lilies clung to me, a morbid perfume that seemed to seep into my very bones. Each inhale was a fresh reminder of my father's demise, of the Blackwood name dragged through the mud and extinguished by the calculating hand of Darius Thorne. The damp earth of the graveyard, still clinging to my boots, felt synonymous with the despair that threatened to swallow me whole. But beneath the suffocating grief, a tiny ember of defiance flickered. I was not yet broken. Thorne's hand, possessive and cold, had guided me from the gravesite, his touch a brand on my skin. He had orchestrated this entire charade, from the fabricated treason that condemned my father to this forced union, his ultimate conquest. He saw me as a trophy, a living testament to his victory, and his eyes, the color of a storm-tossed sea, held a chilling possessiveness that made my skin crawl. He had paraded me before the few remaining Blackwood loyalists, a spectacle of their family's ruin, and then he had brought me here, to Thorne Manor. The imposing silhouette of Thorne Manor loomed against the bruised twilight sky, a stark fortress of dark stone and sharp angles. It was a structure designed to intimidate, to impress, and to convey an indisputable message of power. Unlike the crumbling elegance of Blackwood Castle, with its ancient stones whispering tales of generations past, Thorne Manor felt hollow, sterile, a monument to ambition and ruthless acquisition. Even the gnarled trees surrounding it seemed to bow in deference to its oppressive presence. The carriage journey had been a silent, suffocating ordeal. Inside, the opulent interior, dark, polished wood, rich velvet upholstery, the faint scent of expensive leather, felt like a gilded cage. Thorne sat beside me, his imposing silhouette a constant reminder of my captivity. He spoke little, his voice modulated and precise, a stark contrast to the tempest raging within me. He offered no comfort, no explanation, only a steely determination that spoke volumes about his intent. I was his to command, his to display, his to break. As the carriage drew to a halt before the grand, imposing entrance of Thorne Manor, a phalanx of servants in stark livery stood waiting, their faces impassive, their posture rigid. They were extensions of Thorne's will, silent sentinels in his domain. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped within my chest. This was it. The beginning of my new life. A life forged in the fires of my family's destruction, orchestrated by the man who now claimed me as his wife. Thorne's hand, still resting on my arm, tightened its grip, a subtle but undeniable pressure. "Welcome home, Lady Thorne," he murmured, his voice a low rumble that sent a tremor through me. The words were laced with a cruel irony, a mocking acknowledgement of the title he had forced upon me, the name that was now irrevocably tied to his. I stepped out of the carriage, my legs feeling strangely unsteady, as if the very ground beneath me might crumble. The air here was different from the damp, sorrowful air of the graveyard. It was colder, sharper, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke and something else, something metallic and unforgiving. It was the scent of Thorne's power, of his cold, unyielding domain. He led me inside, his stride long and purposeful, and I followed, my gaze sweeping over the cavernous hall. It was vast and shadowed, adorned with dark tapestries depicting scenes of conquest and victory and portraits of stern-faced ancestors whose eyes seemed to follow my every move. The silence was broken only by the measured echo of our footsteps on the polished marble floor and the faint, monotonous soundtrack of Thorne's breathing. It was designed to impress, to dwarf, to remind any who entered of their insignificance. Your chambers have been prepared, Thorn stated, his voice cutting through the silence. He gestured toward a sweeping staircase that ascended into the shadows. They are adequate. Adequate. The word hung in the air, a dismissive pronouncement that spoke volumes about his regard for my comfort, or lack thereof. I knew my father's castle, Blackwood Castle, was grand, but it was also filled with the warmth of life, the scent of old books, and the comforting creak of familiar floorboards. Thorn Manor felt like a mausoleum, albeit an opulent one. He did not escort me further. Instead, he paused at the foot of the stairs, turning to face me. His expression was unreadable, his stern features carved from marble. You will, of course, adhere to the duties of your station, he said, his gaze pinning me in place. There will be no displays of undue grief. Your brother is well cared for now. The implied threat hung heavy in the air. My mind immediately went to Thomas, my sweet, fragile brother, the last vestige of my family's innocence. Thorn's words were a deliberate torment, a reminder of his absolute control. My fists clenched at my sides, hidden within the folds of my mourning dress. The gnawing ache for my father, for my lost home, for the life that had been so brutally snatched away, threatened to overwhelm me. But I would not give Thorn the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. Not here. Not now. I understand my duties, Lord Thorn, I replied, my voice surprisingly steady, though it felt like it belonged to someone else, someone stronger than the woman I felt myself to be. I met his gaze, forcing myself to hold it, to show him the steely determination that, despite everything, remained within me. And I will fulfill them. A flicker of something. Surprise? Amusement? Crossed his face, too fleeting to be certain. Good, he said, the single word devoid of warmth. I expect nothing less. He turned then, his dark cloak swirling around him, and strode away, disappearing into the shadows of the grand hall, leaving me standing alone, the immense weight of his power pressing down on me. I ascended the stairs, each step a deliberate act of defiance against the crushing atmosphere. The hallway was long and dimly lit, lined with more portraits and ornate, heavy furniture. My chambers were at the end of the corridor, a suite of rooms that were indeed grand, but also chillingly impersonal. Heavy velvet curtains, the color of dried blood, blocked out what little natural light remained. A vast four-poster bed dominated the room, its canopy draped in dark fabric that seemed to absorb all warmth. There was a dressing room, a small sitting area, and even a private study, but it all felt like an elaborate prison. The air was still, stagnant, carrying the faint, cloying scent of polish and something else, something I couldn't quite place. It was the scent of emptiness, of lives lived and lost within these walls, their echoes trapped in the oppressive silence. I walked to the window, drawing back the heavy curtains with a reluctant tug. Below, the grounds of Thorn Manor stretched out, a manicured expanse of perfectly kept gardens and stark, geometric hedges. Beyond them, the dark, brooding woods began, a stark contrast to the beloved, wild forests surrounding Blackwood Castle. There were no signs of life, no cheerful birdsong, only the rustling of leaves and the distant, mournful cry of a hawk. I sank onto the edge of a plush, uncomfortable armchair, the fabric cool and smooth beneath my trembling fingers. My reflection in the polished surface of a nearby table was a pale, haunted face, framed by dark hair. The woman staring back was a stranger, a Lady Thorn, a pawn in a game she had not agreed to play. But as I looked at her, at the hollows beneath her eyes and the faint tremor of her lip, I saw something else too. A spark, a stubborn refusal to be extinguished. They had taken my father, my home, my name. They had tried to break me with their cruelty and their power, but they had not taken my mind, nor had they crushed my spirit entirely. My father had always taught me the importance of strategy, of observing, of waiting for the opportune moment. He had been a brilliant man, outmaneuvered by Thorn's deceit. Thorn thought he had won. He thought he had secured his victory by marrying me, by bringing me into his fortress. But he underestimated the strength of a Blackwood. He underestimated the depth of a daughter's love and a sister's determination. I would survive this. I would learn the ways of Thorn Manor, the secrets it held, the vulnerabilities of its master. I would bide my time, like a predator hidden in the shadows, waiting for my moment to strike. For Thomas. For my father's memory. For the Blackwood name. I would not be a trophy. I would not be a broken bride. I would be the architect